"Choose any bride for free," the father bellowed, his voice hoarse with tobacco and whiskey, carrying across the dim, smoky saloon. The lanterns flickered, casting tall, jittering shadows along the warped wooden walls. Every eye in the room was fixed on the women chained to the auction block, their wrists raw and reddened from iron shackles. The air smelled of sweat, dust, and fear-heavy, suffocating, and metallic. Clara wiped a bead of blood from her palm. Her fingernails cracked from the rough iron. She was 30, tall and lean from years of farm labor and running from dangers she'd hoped to leave behind, but this was a nightmare she hadn't imagined. Her dress, once soft and cream-colored, was torn and stained with dirt and sweat. Her dark hair hung in tangled strands, framing a face hardened by survival, yet still carrying the stubborn spark of defiance. She lifted her chin, refusing to let her fear show, though her heart hammered like a war drum. Around her, 4 other women of similar age, ranging from slender and nimble to strong-shouldered, stood trapped in chains. Each of them had their own story. Widows with debts too large to pay, orphans whose parents had been driven off the land, and farmers' daughters whose innocence had been stolen before they even knew it. Some whispered quietly, comforting each other, while others stared at the floor, eyes hollow with dread. The saloon doors creaked, and a sudden gust of wind brought in the scent of desert sage and horses, sharp and dry. A tall figure stepped through the threshold, and the chatter in the room fell silent. The warrior man. His presence was undeniable, bronzed skin glistening under the dim lantern light, muscles taut beneath a torn shirt, and long black hair bound with beads, bone, and feathers. Tribal jewelry glinted faintly across his chest and wrists. He didn't rush or stumble like the drunken cowboys. He moved with a predator's grace, each step deliberate, each eye scanning the room as if weighing everyone in it. Clara's breath caught. Her father's words still echoed in her ears, but something about this man unsettled the entire room. He stopped before the auction block, hand hovering near a carved knife at his belt. The saloon, once roaring with betting and jeering, fell into tense silence. "My father says I can take anyone," the father slurred, gesturing broadly with a shaking hand. His eyes gleamed with greed as he scanned the line of captives. "Anyone at all. Pick your prize, and she's yours." He laughed, the sound like broken glass scraping across the floor. The warrior's dark eyes flicked from woman to woman. He didn't speak, but the room felt the weight of his gaze. The murmurs grew tense. The cowboys and townsfolk leaned forward, anticipating his choice. Their bets, their laughter, even their weapons, none of it mattered. Not when he finally lifted a finger and pointed. Clara froze. The gesture was simple, almost casual, but it pierced her chest like a lightning bolt. It was her. You want her?" Her father spat, disbelief and fury contorting his face. "She's too broken. She's worthless. No man in his right." "Mind would?" The warrior stepped closer, and the floorboards groaned under his weight. His eyes never left Clara's. They weren't cruel. Not exactly, but sharp and assessing, holding secrets she couldn't yet read. His hand dipped toward the shackles at her wrists. A hush swept through the saloon like a sudden storm. Clara's pulse raced. She wanted to yell, to protest, to flee, but her body was trapped in iron. The other women pressed their faces against the wooden post, murmuring silent prayers. Clara felt heat crawling up her neck, fear and fury fighting inside. Her chest. "Why me?" she thought. "Why now?" Then something unexpected stirred within her, a flicker of hope, small but fierce. Perhaps this man wasn't like the others. Perhaps he didn't see her as property. His gaze lingered, unwavering, and though she didn't understand why, a shiver of relief ran through her. The father's laughter died in his throat as the warrior's hand brushed the iron. the metal clinking sharply in the silence. The saloon held its breath, waiting for what would come next, and in that heartbeat of uncertainty, Clara realized one truth: whether this man would save her or drag her into a new danger was a choice that now rested entirely in his hands. Desert wind howled outside, carrying dust and whispers of freedom. Clara's chest rose and fell with sharp breaths, chains biting into her skin, yet she felt, for the first time in years, a spark of possibility. Somewhere in the shadows, a storm was coming, and she had no choice but to face it. The warrior's gaze never wavered, and the saloon seemed to shrink around him, the crowd fading into muted shapes of fear and anticipation. Every man present knew he was no ordinary fighter. His reputation had preceded him like a storm cloud over the desert, yet none dared challenge him. None except her father, who gritted his teeth, shaking with rage and disbelief. You'll regret this," the father spat, voice trembling. "She's worthless." "No, man." The warrior didn't answer. His eyes held Clara's, unblinking, piercing, weighing her spirit as if he could see through the iron and the fear into the very core of her being. Clara's stomach twisted, not in terror, but in anticipation. She had never been chosen like this, never for protection, never for consideration. Most men either ignored her or tried to exploit her weakness, yet this one didn't. Flinch. The saloon's wooden floor groaned under the warrior's boots as he stepped closer to Clara. Lantern light glinted off the tribal jewelry draped across his chest and arms, beads and carved bone, feathers tied into his long black hair. His muscles flexed beneath the bronzed skin, taut as the strings of a drawn bow. Every motion radiated strength, precision, and confidence. Clara's chains rattled as he crouched slightly to inspect her cuffs. Her heart thundered in her chest, but she didn't look away. The other women shuffled nervously behind her, whispering prayers or holding their breath. She could feel their fear, the tension in the room, the greed and the malice of the crowd pressing down like a heavy, suffocating blanket. "Step aside," the warrior said finally, his voice low, calm, yet carrying a command that could not be ignored. The men nearest him stumbled back, their bravado faltering under the weight of his presence. Clara's father's face twisted with fury. "You'll pay for this. Do you hear me?" "I'll take her," the warrior said simply, interrupting him. The room froze. Even the poker chips and whiskey mugs seemed to stop mid-clatter. Every eye turned toward Clara, and for the first time she felt seen not as a commodity, not as property, but as a person. Her chest tightened. A flush of warmth rose through her body, mingled with fear. What did this mean? Why her? She didn't know him. She didn't know if he would save her or drag her into something worse. Yet his gaze reassured her in a way she hadn't felt in years. A promise of strength, of protection, of defiance against injustice. With a swift motion, the warrior drew a small sharp knife from a sheath at his belt. The blade glinted briefly in the lantern light before he pressed it to the iron cuffs at Clara's wrists. Sparks of metal kissed the wooden floor as the chains began to loosen. The sound was deafening in the tense silence, and Clara's breath came in shallow gasps, mingling with the coarse desert air seeping through the saloon doors. "Clara," the warrior said, tilting his head slightly, "walk with me." Her father bellowed in outrage, but the room had shifted. Even the cowboys, usually quick to draw their revolvers, hesitated. The warrior's presence was like a shield, invisible but palpable, and no one dared challenge it. Clara lifted her chin, her jaw tight with determination. Fear still clutched at her gut, but it was now entwined with something else. Hope, fragile. And electric. The warrior gestured for her to follow, and she stepped down from the auction block. The other women murmured among themselves, watching as chains clinked against the floor. Some envied her. Some trembled at what might follow. Clara's boots hit the saloon floor with purpose now, each step a defiance against the life her father tried to force upon her. The desert wind whistled through the saloon doors as he guided her toward freedom, and the smell of sage, dry sand, and horses filled her senses. The saloon behind them seemed smaller, diminished in importance, its walls lined with greed, cruelty, and fear. Outside, the moonlight stretched across the desert, pale and silver, illuminating the jagged rocks and windswept sand dunes. Clara dared a glance at him. His dark eyes softened for a fleeting moment, just enough for her to catch a glimpse of the man beneath the warrior's armor of strength, a man who had chosen her, against odds, against danger, against everything that sought to bind her. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could step into a life not dictated by chains. But as the wind tore through the desert, carrying whispers of gunfire and vengeance from her father's men, Clara understood one undeniable truth. Their freedom would come at a cost, and whatever storm awaited them in the desert night, she was ready to face it, because for the first time she was not alone. The saloon erupted in chaos. Gunfire cracked, tables splintered, and shouts echoed across the wooden floor. Clara barely had time to register the sound before the warrior Takoda cut her chains with a swift motion, the sharp metal clinking to the floor. His hand, rough but steady, gripped hers and pulled her toward the side door. "Run," he commanded, his voice low but urgent, carrying over the roar of the enraged crowd. Clara stumbled into the cool night, heart hammering like a drum. The desert. Air hit her face, dry and biting, carrying the scent of sage, sand, and distant horse sweat. Behind them, the shouts of her father and the angry townsfolk trailed like thunder, growing louder as they realized the warrior had dared to steal one of their prizes. They ran through the narrow streets, dust rising around their boots in clouds that glittered silver under the moonlight. Clara's dress caught on splintered boards, tearing further, and her lungs burned with each desperate breath. Takoda never slowed. He moved like a shadow, a storm incarnate, guiding her through the maze of alleys and debris with practiced ease. "Where are we going?" Clara gasped, struggling to keep pace. "Far," Takoda replied, not breaking stride. His muscles rippled beneath bronzed skin as he leapt over crates and barrels. His long black hair streamed behind him, feathers and beads catching the pale light like fragments of fire. His eyes never left the path, scanning for ambush, calculating each step with predator precision. A sudden burst of rifle fire rang out from the saloon's balcony. Sparks struck the dry earth around them. Clara screamed, and Takoda yanked her behind a stack of overturned barrels. The sharp tang of gunpowder filled her nostrils. Her hand shook as she realized the danger they were in and the bravery it took to face it. "We can't stop," he whispered, his voice firm but calm. "We move until we're beyond their reach." Hours blurred into one another as they crossed the desert under a silver moon. The wind whipped sand into their eyes, scratching and stinging, but Takoda kept going. His long stride swallowed the distance, and Clara clung to him, trusting him more than anyone she had ever known. Each step was a defiance, a rebellion against a world that had tried to chain her body and spirit. By the first light of dawn, the saloon, the town, and the shouts of her father were gone behind them, swallowed by the endless desert. They reached a canyon rim that fell sharply into a valley below, the red rocks glowing softly in the morning sun. Takoda dismounted with effortless grace and extended a hand to help Clara down. Her boots crunched on the gravel as she followed, eyes wide, taking in the vast, wild beauty of the canyon. The scent of earth and sage filled her senses, sharp and invigorating. For the first time, Clara realized how much she had missed being free of walls, fences, and chains. Her heart still, pounded, but it was no longer only from fear. There was exhilaration here too, the raw thrill of survival. The hum of possibility. Takoda started a small fire in a sheltered alcove of the canyon. Smoke curled up toward the rising sun, carrying the smell of sage and dried wood. He didn't speak at first, simply tending the flame, his silhouette strong and unwavering. Clara watched him, realizing how different he was from any man she had ever known. There was no greed in his eyes, no desire to claim or dominate. There was only present strength tempered with restraint. "Why did you choose me?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper, uncertain if she wanted the answer. Takoda's dark eyes softened slightly, though he didn't turn fully toward her. "Because you didn't look away. You faced fear without letting it own." "You," Clara swallowed hard. She didn't know whether to feel relief, confusion, or gratitude. Her hands flexed instinctively, still aching from the iron cuffs, and she realized she had never felt more alive. A distant sound broke the moment, the faint echo of hooves, growing steadily louder. Takoda's body tensed, muscles coiling like a spring. Clara froze. The hunters had tracked them. He gestured for her to stay low behind a rock. The wind carried the smell of horses and leather, mingled with gunpowder. Clara's stomach twisted, but she trusted him. Takoda's eyes, dark and intense, never left the approaching threat. For the first time, she understood fully, freedom would not come without a fight. And in that moment, standing on the canyon edge with the desert wind whipping around her, Clara realized she was ready. The storm of gunfire, vengeance, and survival was coming, and she would face it beside the warrior who had saved her. By mid-morning, the desert sun had climbed high, burning pale and merciless across the dunes. Clara's lips were dry, her throat parched, and the raw scrape of sand against her skin reminded her of every moment she had spent in chains. But Takoda never slowed. His long strides carried him across the arid land as though the desert itself obeyed his pace. Every muscle flexed beneath bronzed skin, powerful and fluid, his long black hair a dark banner flowing behind him. The beads, bones, and feathers of his tribal jewelry clinked faintly with each movement, a soft music in the harsh silence of the wilderness. Clara stumbled once, caught in a patch of brush, and he grasped her elbow, steadying her. "You must keep moving," he said, voice low, controlled, carrying an authority that brooked no argument. His dark eyes scanned the horizon constantly, alert to any danger. The hunters would not have given up so easily. Her father's wrath, fueled by greed and humiliation, would drive them across the desert like bloodhounds on a scent. "Why are you helping me?" Clara asked, finally letting her exhaustion break through her fear. Her voice cracked. "I don't even know you, and you've risked everything to save me." Takoda didn't answer immediately. Instead, he paused at a ridge overlooking a narrow canyon, the wind carrying the sharp scent of sage and the distant tang of earth. He knelt, pressing his palm to the ground, listening. Clara watched him in the pale light, seeing not just strength, but an ancient wisdom, a connection to the land that was beyond her understanding. "The desert shows who survives," he said finally, standing and extending his hand to her. "You cannot run from it, but you can learn to move with it." Clara took his hand, feeling the heat of his skin and the rough calluses that spoke of a life of labor, battle, and survival. They descended into the canyon, the walls red and jagged, shadows long and dramatic as the sun angled down. They found a small alcove, partially hidden by boulders, offering shelter from the sun and a vantage point over the valley below. Here, Takoda stopped, finally letting his muscles relax just enough to breathe. He started a fire, rubbing sticks together with the skill of someone who had done it countless times before. Smoke curled upward, carrying the pungent scent of sagewood. sharp against the morning air. Clara crouched beside him, her hands brushing against the rough stones as she tried to calm her racing heart. The desert was alive with whispers, the distant cry of a hawk, the subtle rustle of lizards, and the faint echo of waters somewhere far beyond the horizon. It was beautiful, deadly, and alive in a way she had never known. Takoda's gaze softened, flicking toward her. "You survived the chains, the auction, the fear," he said, almost to himself. "That is not luck, that is courage." Clara felt a shiver run through her. She had always seen herself as practical, cautious, and broken by circumstance. But hearing his words, seeing his unwavering belief in her, sparked something she hadn't felt in years: possibility. For a moment, they sat in silence, watching the firelight dance across the canyon walls. Clara's throat ached from the dust and the dryness. Her skin was raw, but she felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time, she was no longer running under someone else's rules. She was moving toward a life that she could claim, step by step, with every exhausted stride across the sand. Then, faintly, the sound of hooves reached them, the telltale thrum of pursuit. Takoda's body tensed, every muscle coiled. Clara's stomach dropped. The hunters had found them. He didn't panic. Instead, he crouched low, gesturing for her to do the same. The fire flickered, shadows dancing across his bronzed skin and tribal jewelry. Clara's heart pounded, but she felt the first stirrings of trust. The realization that she was not alone in facing the storm that had followed her out of the saloon. "We will not go quietly," Takoda murmured. His eyes were dark, intense, and full of purpose. "They will not take you back. Not while I stand." Clara swallowed hard, knowing the battle ahead would not be easy. That danger still lurked in the Red Canyon walls. That freedom came at a cost. Yet, for the first time since her chains had bound her wrists, she felt the taste of hope. The desert wind whipped around them, carrying dust and the faint whisper of freedom. And in that moment, as the fire crackled and the sun burned high above the canyon rim, Clara understood that survival wasn't just about running. It was about standing tall, fighting, and claiming her life back. The storm was coming, and they would face it together. Back in town, Clara's father slammed his fists against the poker table, rattling coins, whiskey bottles, and the hard-packed dust of the floor. His face was red, contorted with fury and disbelief. "She's mine. That warrior has stolen what belongs to me," he shouted, the words jagged, sharp, and dripping with venom. The room went silent, the usual gamblers and cowboys frozen in their seats, knowing the father's wrath was a dangerous force, reckless, merciless, and fueled by humiliation. A few men exchanged uneasy glances. Some had witnessed the audacity of the warrior, others feared the wrath of a man scorned by blood, family, and pride. Yet none doubted the father's determination. He barked orders, voice cracking with rage, summoning 10 of the town's finest riders, rough men with rifles slung across their shoulders, faces hardened by dust and whiskey. "Find them? Bring her back," he growled, "and leave that savage bleeding in the dirt." The riders mounted their horses at dawn, spurs clicking, rifles ready. They rode with the urgency of men whose employer had promised gold and vengeance. Across the desert, the hoofbeats tore the silence apart, kicking up clouds of sand that glimmered in the morning sun. Clara's father, left behind for now, spat into the dust, muttering threats under his breath. The town itself buzzed with nervous anticipation, the whisper of the escaped woman and the warriors spreading like wildfire. Meanwhile, in the canyon, Clara and Takoda rose with the first light. Sleep had been brief and uneasy, the fire reduced to smoldering embers. Their eyes met briefly. Clara could see the quiet tension in Takoda's posture, the way every muscle remained coiled for action. He had been silent most of the night, listening. to the whispers of the desert, attuned to the movements of wind, sand, and predator. Clara realized just how skilled, how alive to danger he truly was. "We can't stay," Takoda said, his voice low but firm. "They will come, and they will not stop until they get you back." Clara swallowed hard. Fear gnawed at her, sharp and relentless, but beneath it a spark of determination stirred. She had lived chained, controlled, and defined by her father's greed and the town's corruption. Now she had a chance to reclaim herself, even if it meant facing death in the desert. The riders appeared first as distant shadows on the horizon, dust swirling around them like a brown storm. Takoda crouched low, gesturing for Clara to stay behind a boulder. His hands were steady, but Clara could feel the tension in every line of his body. He was ready to fight, to protect, to ensure that her chains would never close again. "They think they can take you," he murmured, dark eyes scanning the riders, "but the desert does not belong to them. It belongs to those who know it, to those who survive it." The riders closed the distance. Gunfire erupted, echoing off the canyon walls. Clara ducked instinctively, heart pounding, dust stinging her eyes. Takoda moved like a shadow through the chaos, muscles coiling and striking with lethal precision. He disarmed one rider, sidestepped another's rifle swing, and protected Clara at every turn. His bare torso glistened with sweat, the tribal jewelry across his chest catching the sunlight in flashes. Clara's fear was intense, but so was her exhilaration. She had never seen someone move with such perfect control, such mastery of the land and the moment. And she realized something frightening, thrilling. Her survival no longer depended on luck. It depended on her courage and on the warrior beside her. By the time the sun climbed higher, the riders had retreated, beaten back into the desert by Takoda's skill and the treacherous terrain. Clara crouched beside him, breathing hard, adrenaline coursing through her veins. The desert wind carried the faint echo of hoofbeats, but the immediate danger had passed for now. Takoda reached over, brushing sand from her arm. "You are stronger than you think," he said, dark eyes meeting hers. "Do not let them ever convince you otherwise." Clara nodded, the words sinking into her like a promise. For the first time, she felt truly seen, not as property, not as a prize, but as a woman capable of surviving the harshest storms. Yet as the canyon fell silent once more, the desert stretching endlessly around them, Clara knew one undeniable truth. Her father's wrath would not end here. The hunt would continue, the danger would return, and freedom would not be given, it would be taken. And she would face it, side by side with Takoda, prepared to claim her life back, step by step, heartbeat by heartbeat. Clara and Takoda moved deeper into the canyon, the red rock walls rising like silent sentinels around them. The desert sun burned high above, and the wind carved sharp patterns into the sand, carrying the faint scent of sage and distant water. They paused in a narrow alcove, hidden from view, and Takoda crouched beside a small fire, tending it with practiced hands. Smoke curled into the sky, swirling with the dry, crisp air of the canyon, carrying the scent of survival. Clara sank to her knees beside him, rubbing her sore wrist where the chains had bitten her skin. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe, to let the quiet of the desert seep into her bones. Takoda's presence was a strange comfort. His bronzed, muscular body gleamed in the morning light, his long black hair flowing over his shoulders, adorned with beads, bone, and feathers. Tribal jewelry caught the light, reflecting tiny sparks like fire. Every motion he made was precise, deliberate, alive with a calm intensity that kept danger at bay. "You saved me," Clara said finally, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I don't understand why you risked yourself for me." Takoda's dark eyes softened, though he didn't turn fully to her. "Because you faced fear without letting it break you," he replied, his voice low, calm, and carrying a weight she could feel deep in her chest. "Most would have cowered, cried, or run blindly. You saw what was before you, and you chose to face it." Clara swallowed hard. She had spent her entire life running from her father's greed, from poverty, from people who saw her as nothing more than property. And yet, here she was, alive and free, protected by a man whose own life was as bound to the desert as the wind itself. The fire crackled softly, and the canyon seemed almost to hold its breath. The distant cries of birds echoed through the cliffs, sharp and piercing. Clara's mind wandered to her father, to the hunters he had sent, and the knowledge that their pursuit would not end. The desert offered refuge, but only for a moment. Soon they would come. Takoda's hand brushed hers instinctively as he adjusted the fire, a subtle reassurance in the harsh wilderness. Clara felt a shiver run through her. There was something unspoken in his gaze, something that went beyond survival. For a fleeting moment, the canyon walls, the wind, and the fire seemed suspended in time, and she felt the stirrings of trust, of connection, of something fragile and rare. "We must move again soon," Takoda said, his tone urgent but measured. "They will not give up. Your father's pride is too strong and his anger too dangerous. The desert does not forgive hesitation." Clara nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. The hunt would continue, and danger would come again. But for the first time, she felt she had a chance, not just to survive, but to fight, to live on her own terms. Hours passed in tense silence. They ate sparingly dried meat and cactus water, and Takoda taught her how to read the subtle signs of the canyon, the tracks of animals, the whispers of the wind, the faint echoes that hinted at movement beyond the cliffs. Clara listened intently, absorbing every lesson, realizing that survival was more than strength. It was awareness, patience, and trust. As the sun dipped lower, painting the canyon walls in hues of amber and crimson, Clara finally dared to ask the question that had haunted her since the auction block. "Takoda, why me? Why did you choose me when so many others were there?" He paused, muscles tensing briefly before answering. "Because you did not look at me with fear or anger or greed. You looked at me with truth, and I recognize strength. When I see it," Clara's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to argue, to ask more, but words failed her. Instead, she let silence settle between them, a fragile bridge of understanding. Then, faintly, carried on the evening wind, came the fanga, sound of hoofbeats. Clara froze. Takoda's body coiled, every muscle taut like a drawn bow. The hunters had not given up. They had followed them to the canyon. He placed a finger to his lips, a silent command to stay low, and crouched, the firelight casting shadows across his bronzed chest, highlighting the tribal jewelry that glinted like armor. Clara's heart pounded, but she felt, for the first time in years, that she was not alone. The canyon held them. The wind whispered secrets, and the fire burned low. But danger was near, and freedom, fragile as it was, would require courage beyond anything Clara had ever imagined, and she was ready to face it. The canyon echoed with the thunder of hooves. Clara's heart slammed against her ribs as she pressed herself behind a jagged boulder, the wind whipping grit into her eyes. Takoda crouched beside her, every muscle taut and ready, his bronzed, shirtless body glistening with sweat, tribal jewelry glinting in the fading sunlight. His long black hair whipped around his face, but his eyes never left the approaching riders. "They've come," he murmured, voice low and steady. "Hold fast. Do not move unless I say." Clara nodded, fear and determination twisting together inside her. She had fled chains, auctions, and a father who saw her as property. Now, on the edge of the desert cliffs, with the canyon walls looming above them, she understood the stakes of true freedom. It was not given, it was claimed, with courage and grit and, if necessary, blood. The riders surged forward, rifles raised, shouting, their dust clouds painting the canyon in a storm of brown and gold. Takoda rose slowly, his bare chest shining. Under the sun, muscles coiled like springs. He stepped into the open, unafraid, a dark figure of power and defiance. One of the riders fired, and the bullet whined past, burying itself harmlessly in the canyon wall. Takoda's eyes never faltered. "Clara," he shouted, "run along the ridge. Follow me." With no time to hesitate, she scrambled after him, boots kicking up dust and rocks. The wind screamed past her ears, whipping her hair into her face. But she pressed on, keeping pace with the warrior whose skill and strength seemed almost superhuman. He led her along narrow paths, over jagged stones, and down steep inclines that would have broken an ordinary man. But Takoda moved like the desert itself had shaped him, unyielding and unstoppable. Behind them, the riders faltered, struggling with the treacherous terrain. One slipped, another's horse stumbled, and their shouts turned to cries of frustration and fear. Clara glanced back and saw the desperate anger on her father's face, the same fury that had ruled her childhood, now powerless against the raw force of Takoda's mastery of the land. Finally, they reached a hidden alcove near a small desert spring. Takoda crouched beside the water, cupping it in his hands and offering it to Clara. She drank greedily, the cool liquid a stark contrast to the burning sun and dust that had tormented her for hours. Her chest rose and fell, adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "They will not follow us here," Takoda said, his voice calm, but his dark eyes scanning every shadow. "This place is hidden, and the desert guards its secrets." Clara looked at him, truly looked for the first time without fear clouding her vision. His face, rugged and commanding, softened as he met her gaze. I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, voice trembling. "You saved me. You risked everything." Takoda smiled faintly, a rare warmth breaking through his stoic exterior. "Your strength saved yourself," he said. "I merely followed it." The sun dipped lower, casting long, golden shadows across the canyon walls. Clara allowed herself to breathe, to feel the wind on her face, the taste of freedom in her lungs. For the first time in her life, she was unchained not just from iron, but from fear, from control, from the weight of her father's greed. And then Takoda did something she hadn't expected. He extended his hand, not as a protector, not as a warrior, but as an equal, a partner in the fight that had brought them here. "You are not broken," he said quietly, the desert wind carrying his words like a vow. "You are alive, and alive is enough." Clara took his hand, feeling the power and warmth in his grip, the promise of someone who would stand by her side, no matter the storm that came. Tears prickled her eyes, but they were tears of relief, of hope, of awakening. Somewhere far below, the distant echoes of her father's fury faded into the desert wind. The canyon had swallowed the hunters, and for now, the wild, untamed desert belonged to them alone. Clara and Takoda sat by the spring, watching the sun sink into the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple. For the first time, Clara felt the exhilaration of living on her own terms, of facing fear and surviving it, of finding a connection deeper than chains or cruelty could ever sever. The desert stretched endlessly around them, vast, dangerous, and beautiful. And as the first stars began to blink into existence, Clara understood that freedom was not a gift, it was a battle. And tonight she had won.